They said VR was dying. They said it's too cumbersome, too unwieldy, needs too much space, annoying to set up. Who said all these things? I have no idea, probably me at some point. But all that has just changed, mostly. Why? Because now we have the Pimax Crystal Super. And native support for Star Citizen. That's 3840 by 3840 per freaking eyeball. Now, here's some backstory. I've gamed at 4K since the 2080 Ti days. I've never had a monitor. I've always had a 56-inch 4K TV that sits between 4 and 5 feet from my chubby little face. It's pixel perfect. It fills my entire visual cone, and I've always been a very happy little gamer. When VR came out, I got the original Oculus, tried things out, had some good times, but ultimately decided the fidelity wasn't comparable to what I already had. Couldn't read dials and text in cockpits and so on, so it just became a toy for the kids. Any reduction in fidelity would be a downgrade I wouldn't be willing to accept. I knew what I was waiting for. I was waiting for 4K per eye. Then, all of a sudden, Star Citizen jumps out the closet and goes, ta-da, I'm all freaking fabulous in 3D now. Found myself on the Pimax store. Seen the resolution of the new headset, excellent. Everything was looking up. Bit too close to Christmas though, maybe I'll hold off a bit till next year. The very next day, I get some message from a guy at Pimax saying they want to send me a review unit. Long story short, my VR yearnings to the universe had been answered. There is a God, and she wants me to play VR at resolutions that would melt the lenses out a lesser man's eyes. So let's get on with the show. Okay, let's get right down to the meat and bones. We'll go over the specs a bit later, but does it meet my expectations? I know it's likely better than any headset released before it, but there's only so much density can be packed into something this size. So how is the clarity compared to the 4K OLED? The answer is, it depends. I feel like with things at a distance, it's a bit worse, but with things up close, it's actually better. Now, obviously you're not seeing what I'm seeing, but the textures of all the objects in the world suddenly all jump out at you in ways you've never really experienced before. Things you walk past all the time suddenly draw you in and demand your attention. It's cliché, but immersed is the only appropriate term. I'm just gonna come out and say it. When I finally got it all working and running the way I wanted, which was no small task by the way, and we'll get into that, I had an absolutely existential moment. I came out of the habs, I stood and looked at some plants on a waterfall for about half a freaking hour, and then I made my way to the hangar and brought up an Eclipse. Had the mandatory time walking around the hangar going ooh and ah at its new relative size, but then I jumped in. I have never been so blown away in a game for a very long time. It was like I had never seen this cockpit before. Then the screens all folded back into place and the roof came down and oh my god, like I just melted. Every little dial and switch just suddenly there. In fact, the texture on the grips of each dial and switch was there. Turning those screens on was literally the coolest thing I've ever witnessed. I had two arms all of a sudden as well. There was a strange extra connection between me and my avatar that I didn't expect. I felt almost scared, like some idiot had let me actually pilot an 8 million credit spaceship. And it's not just the textures and stuff. I didn't expect it to be better than my screen up close, but that's not really what was melting my brain. It's the addition of that new dimension. It's quite hard to define. It's like pulling 2D Mario off a sheet of paper and turning him in your hands and realising you can see all of him. You can appreciate things you find more because they literally have a whole other dimension to them. You can peer inside things and around them. It's obvious at this point because VR's been around for so long, but they're realer. For years I've used a finely tuned head tracking setup that freely lets me slew my head and make it feel like I'm leaning in my seat, left, right, forward, back, up and down, as well as looking in all the directions and roll when I tilt my head. But to be honest, in all games outside DCS, I disable the head slew movement because it just doesn't feel right. and it's a nightmare when it drifts off your body. But even on the TV screen, when I needed to look closely at an MFD, I used the zoom control built into the game to get a better look. In VR, there's a far more natural interaction with the space around your head. If you can't quite focus on something, you just lean in. It doesn't feel like there's software artificially adjusting sliders and curves and moving your head along some axis. It moves the right amount that matches your movement. That, strangely enough, was one of the most striking things that caught me off guard. That 1-to-1 ratio of movement with the area inside your cockpit instantly just adds this more intuitive layer. If you've used VR in the past, you already know a lot of what I'm saying. The main question is, would I use this over the 4K OLED? Bottom line, for anything that involves flying, I tried out a few other games over the last few days and my impressions are quite likely lacking in that long-term experience. So definitely get some good second opinions. But for stuff like DCS, Flight Simulator, Star Citizen, No Man's Sky, absolutely. Would heavily consider switching to this as my primary interface. When I jumped in the Tomcat on DCS, I just started laughing and kept laughing like an absolute maniac. This couldn't be real. My stomach was turning as I did rolls. I was getting vertigo going upside down. I was in a freaking Tomcat, guys. Like, I'd never been so happy. In 2D, I always felt like the Tomcat cockpit was quite spacious, but instantly in VR, I was cramped in with this dash about a foot from my nose, glass inches above my head, and both sides just pushing in. Absolute shithole of a jet. But I had a smile from ear to ear like you wouldn't believe. And that experience was the same in all the software I tried. And these were all games I had deliberately avoided playing until this day. We had Half-Life Alyx in there. Again, just in sheer awe at the level of detail. Was on that initial rooftop for more than an hour, just picking things up and peering around into things, and no doubt this honeymoon stage will wear off, but I can only give you my experience, and having very little VR experience to compare it to, I can only say what I see, and our only point of comparison is the 4K flat screen. So going from that to this was obviously always going to be a massive shift. And there were some drawbacks. Let me try and articulate them as best I can. For a start, your image is super sharp in the centre of your vision. There's a sweet spot there that looks the best. When you look off to one side with just your eyes, things aren't as sharp. This is annoying, as you can imagine, and it's either an artifact of the way VR renders to save performance, or something to do with the lenses themselves. Even after calibrating eye tracking and messing around for a few days, I never got it to improve. It's not so bad, and it may be something you can get used to, but in cockpits, if you're just flicking your eyes around to read controls, it's not the greatest effect. Now, it's still completely legible, but that little blurriness just grates a little bit. Secondly, at a distance, things get a little fuzzy. Again, not massively, but it's noticeable, and I feel like I would have an easier time picking out distant targets on the TV. The 3D effect over massive distances was surprisingly underwhelming as well. Like flying around a station in Star Citizen, or even a few kilometers above the ground in DCS, was all awesome, and you really felt that depth. But I didn't get that sense of vertigo when looking at, say, a whole planet. It was like it was either too far away or too big. There was no sense of scale there. It's like everything past a certain point is just set to infinite and might as well be a background JPEG. But then with something like a planet, there's not much background to have relative parallax to. It usually takes up your whole vision from a station. So that could just be my limited testing showing through there. But I feel like VR is tailored more for close to medium range, and anything beyond that is just distant. I don't know if that even makes much sense, to be honest. While we're on the negatives, I should really touch on the setting things up side of things. Coming from no prior experience other than some curated one-click stuff, this was rough. Day one was just installing a bunch of VR games I had been quietly collecting for years until this day arrived. Day two was achieving some limited success. I got the Room VR working, but the game was totally borked and got immediately returned. I tried Half-Life Alyx and it wouldn't work. Star Citizen would just constantly crash, and DCS was just a helicopter stuck to my face when I moved my head. So I proceeded to read the whole internet, messed around, got nowhere. No progress really. Day 3 we started to see some movement though. The problem with Star Citizen was a VRAM issue. If you run out of VRAM the game crashes basically. I could set a custom resolution through Steam VR, which is what the game uses to run. By default it was set to 150%, that's 150% of 8K, so yeah, we were essentially trying to run Star Citizen at 12K. Once I knocked that slider down a fair chunk, it improved things immediately. Still a bit sketchy, but I got it stable in the end. The trick was starting slow and slowly increasing the virtual res until it was looking good and not crashing. Total pain in the arse, but like I said, stepping into that Eclipse at 4K per eye made me cry with happiness, so it was worth it in the end. Not sure what fixed Alex, to be honest, could have been the same issue. I was trying a lot of things at the time, but DCS had to run from the Pimax own software and not Steam VR. That seemed to be the main issue there. The official Pimax written guides were also pretty helpful in the end if you follow them to the letter. Once you get your hands on the controls for the settings of your headset though, most problems just disappear. You can then trade performance for clarity where necessary and a far better experience emerges. Apart from that, I've been pretty happy with the device. The inbuilt speakers are pretty rubbish, to be honest. Either that or they're just not great over the noise of the inbuilt fan, so headphones are required. The device is quite heavy, but I never felt burdened by it, to be honest, and considering what it's packing in there, that kinda checks out. We should probably talk about some of those specs though. The unit they sent is the Pimax Crystal Super. The price is around $1,700 or £1,400. There's a few payment options where it looks like you can pay half, get it sent out, and then pay the rest in installments. The resolution is 3040 by 3040 per eye and can run in either 75 or 90 Hz modes. It has a horizontal field of view of 127 degrees, but this can be pushed in what's called the Labs mode. This is basically a beta testing app that lets you push experimental features like putting the FOV to 130 degrees and upping the refresh rate to 120 Hz. I haven't tested this at all, in fact I'm only just reading about it now whilst writing this, but it appears to let you do this at your own discretion with the possible side effect of instability basically. It runs on QLEDs and a mini LED backlight. 57 pixels per degree, which is the densest pixel density of its kind in a headset apparently. If you don't think you have the horsepower for all of that, there is the Crystal Light, which is significantly cheaper with less pixel density. Now, I'm not getting paid to do this, I've basically been rented a cool headset for free for a while. I will get a small percentage of any sales made through this channel though. To that end, you can get a decent discount with the code in the description. I'll probably do some follow-up videos showing you how to set things up and tune the performance into that sweet spot for Star Citizen. We'll probably do the same for DCS as well. In conclusion though, it's a fantastic experience, the effect is awesome, the clarity is unbelievable, but you have to be willing to spend some time setting things up and getting things tuned to your personal preference. I was worried the performance wasn't going to be where it needed to be, especially with Star Citizen, but it does seem like it's within tolerable margins, especially with the resolution slider on hand, and that's on a 4090. I'm now off to Area 18 to have a walk around. I'll update you with any changes I find, whether that be positive or negative, over the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for those. Hope you all had a nice festive season. I personally feel like I've put on about 20 kilos. I'm sure it was worth it. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go stare at a treadmill whilst polishing off some cheesecake. 07 guys.